SaveWithConrad.com.
Yeah, I'm Justin Ruffin from Knoxville, Tennessee. What got me to Save with Conrad was the 83 Weeks podcast. I really wasn't thinking about getting rid of any debt. I just wanted to cash out some equity in the house to do remodeling. But I did both, so that was pretty awesome. Worked out great. Redid the foyer, built pantry space, and there's little odds and ends when I first bought the house that I wanted to take care of, and we were able to take care of it. So, yeah, paid off 2 cars and some credit card debt. So probably all in all, getting $30,000 in that. And then I got some $30,000 more equity out of the house, and still plenty of equity left over. So payment's good. I lowered my interest rate. I'm in a much better spot than I was. Super easy. Everybody was great. Very, very awesome people. Francis and Steve were great to work with. They were awesome. Made it through a very easy, seamless experience. I'd probably say all in all, probably $1,000 a month at least. I lowered my interest rate, especially the way the interest rates are right now, which is, that's amazing. I'm Justin Bruckman from Knoxville, Tennessee. I saved over $1,000 with SaveWithConrad.com, and I did a lot of renovations with that money as well.
NMLS number 2129, Equal Housing Lender. SaveWithConrad.com.
It's time to count down the top 5. Brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
My top 5 nWo numbers. My number 5 is Conan. Man, he was so overlooked in the big scheme of things because he's in there with Hogan and Hall and Nash. And as great as Conan was, and as much of a superstar as Conan was in Mexico, he was known in the U.S., but it would be hard not to agree that Conan was really, to a degree, in the shadows of some talent that had been, top of mind, big name talent for decades. So I think Conan really is one of the most overlooked members. He brought a level. I think Conan had much more of an influence on the nWo than people think. And it's important that people realize the nWo was really a collaborative effort. And it continued throughout the entire run of the nWo, but one of the guys who came in early on, and I think Scott and Kevin in particular, really picked up on Conan's vibe, because Conan brought a authentic, you hear the term OG, original gangster. It's thrown around a lot. Conan was the OG of the nWo because he brought such a cool vibe that was relevant. His finger on the pulse of hip-hop, Latin culture, which is really emerging in the United States back at that time. So I think Conan really is overlooked in many different respects. And I think Scott, not Scott, obviously, if Scott was still with us, he would agree, I'm sure. And I know Kevin would too, the influence that Conan had. And of course, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were influenced by Conan. Hogan was influenced to a large degree. And Hulk will talk about that. He was able to create some phrases too, which caught on a lot, catchphrases like, yo, 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 let me speak on this. And all of a sudden, when you hear that now, first person you're going to think of. Let's go to number 4. This is a guy I've talked a lot about, a lot. I have a ton of respect for him, a lot of affection for him. I really, really like Six-Pack Sean Waltman. But again, 6th member, right? He came in, sitting in the crowd. It felt like another guy was coming over to WCW from WWF. Now, I don't think Sean Waltman had been in WCW previously. He might have been in and out for a 1 shot or a 2 shot or something like that. So I didn't have the, hey, I used to be here and now I'm coming back. But Sean was such a big star in WWE. People, they loved his work in WWE. And I think when Scott came over, and again, Sean, I should say, Sean brought a certain vibe that was even different than Conan's. Very cool, very relevant, very current, but different than Conan. So there was an authenticity. That's what I'm really trying hard to say. There was an authenticity in X-Pac's character, Six-Pack, that really lent itself to the nWo. It was a great addition. It wasn't a dilution That happened much later on, right? When the NWO became diluted because we were just adding so many people that didn't bring anything to the table. They didn't bring what Conan brought to the table. They didn't bring what Sean Waltman brought to the table with his character, Six Pack. He was the worker of the group. Sean Waltman could go in there and fly around and do the shit that Scott Hall, it wasn't in his repertoire, so to speak. It wasn't in his character. It didn't make sense for Scott to work like that. Kevin Nash wasn't about to try to fly around. That would have been horrible for everybody. Hulk Hogan, I guarantee you, wasn't going to go coming off the top rope with anything. And Sean Waltman could get in there. He could fly. He could bump. He could sell. He could provide the physical, the dynamic action that the larger-than-life characters wouldn't have been able to do because A, it wasn't in their character, and B, physically, I don't think they were capable of doing it. I know they weren't, like Sean Waltman. Very few people were. Kevin Nash, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Kevin Nash, big, sexy. Kevin Nash provided that threat, that larger-than-life intimidation, visually. When Scott Hall was in front of the announce desk and Kevin Nash came up behind me, I just signed a bunch of autographs of this picture last weekend in Indianapolis. By the way, great time, great event. I loved it. But when Kevin Nash came up behind me, and he's looking down at me, and I turn around, and all I see is the center of his chest, and I look up like I'm looking up at a giant redwood. That visual, that made it. That added so much credibility, right, to what was happening. We still didn't know it was going to be the NWO yet, but that threat was real. There was danger. Good element to having a story. Good element, danger. And Kevin Nash provided that danger. All right, let's talk about Scott Hall, the man who jump-started this thing. That moment was so real, so believable. And again, from the get-go, it wasn't because I directed Scott much. I worked on the promo with him. I knew what he was going to say, and I crafted it, quite honestly, for him in many ways. And Scott took it and he kind of made it its own. So I knew the narrative, the dialogue, I was completely involved in. But the vibe, I didn't say, Scott, now when you come down, I want you looking cool as shit. I want you to come down through that crowd like you own this freaking building. Like the key to Macon, Georgia, it's on your key ring. It's not something you get once a year. It's on your key ring, muckerfather. I didn't say that, but that's exactly what Scott Hall did. He had the instinct, even not knowing for sure where the story was going, because I hadn't laid it all out to Scott and or Kevin at this point. But Scott had the instinct, based on his experience, to feel where this thing was going and what we were trying to accomplish. And he came down through that crowd. He's like, if James Dean could wrestle, that was Scott Hall. Number one, come on, we all know. And this is not as easy as it sounds, right? Because when you really analyze after the fact and you look at the different elements that each of these guys brought to the table, if you had to put a valuation on it, it would be really difficult because it's subjective. And sometimes the littlest things can have the greatest impact. And when I say littlest things, I just mean the vibe that Conan brought or the vibe that X-Pac brought, because they were different, right? The coolness of Scott Hall, all of those, if you take any of those elements out of the NWO might not have been the NWO. At least not the one we remember, because we would have forgotten about it a long time ago. All right? Hulk Hogan turning heel, the reason it's my number one, and I know, listen, people live to disagree with me, and I embrace that. Bring it on. I like it. I have fun with it. I love hearing different opinions. Hulk Hogan turning heel was the final straw. It was everything the NWO needed to become what it has become today, or what it would become at that time, because it was a massive move that nobody saw coming. Nobody anticipated it, including me. In fact, not only did I not anticipate it, it was up until I saw Hulk Hogan walk in the building about an hour before we were supposed to go out and do that segment, because I kept him away from the venue all day. I didn't want him walking around because then people, oh, he's the third guy. Because that's all anybody was talking about. And Hogan hadn't been around for a long time. So if Hogan would have showed up, oh, there's the third guy, it wouldn't have mattered, because this was like before the internet really, and cell phones and all that kind of shit, text messages. It's not like it would have ruined anything, but it would have taken the fun out of it for me. Selfishly, I didn't want anybody to know because I wanted to feel a real reaction. And when Hulk Hogan came down and everybody assumed he was there to back up Savage, and he dropped that leg and get up and started cutting that promo, that moment to this day is still one of the most magical moments I've ever experienced. And I've heard a lot of people that were in the audience say the same thing. So there's my top 5 and my number 1.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's time to count down the top 5.
The top 5 firings that occurred under my watch while I was in WCW. So let's get it started and see who the top 5 firings were under my watch in WCW.
Top 5. Your number 5 is Brian Pillman.
Brian Pillman. That's a weird one, though. I know technically, yes, he was fired, but it's a strange one because it was an understanding that Brian and I had. And I know there's all kinds of history and everybody's got a different opinion. But, Brian was smart enough to realize that the deck was pretty well stacked at the top. Brian felt like he needed a change. He needed to refresh his character. He was really digging the crazy Brian Pillman gimmick and taking it to an extreme. And it was fun as hell. Trust me, I enjoyed it. But I think Brian was looking for a way out. He wanted to come back, but he was looking for a way out so he could go expand his character and kind of continue building that whole crazy Brian Pillman character. So while technically it was a firing, both Brian and I talked throughout that period of time when he was in WWF at the time, and we talked about him coming back and when would be the best time. And it was an interesting situation, but Brian ultimately, ended up doing what he wanted to do. I ended up focusing on what I needed to focus on. At the end of the day, yes, Brian Pillman was one of those controversial firings or terminations, but it was mutual. So I'm going to include it just because it was so controversial. But I certainly didn't enjoy firing. I didn't enjoy firing anybody. That's another really interesting misconception and narrative that I've heard throughout the years. Is I was just on this power trip and I love firing people. The truth is, I felt exactly the opposite. I hated firing people. There were a lot of people I should have fired and I never did. Kicking myself in the ass to this day. Most of them weren't talent, really. They were people that were in the office. But nevertheless, I get credit and criticism for letting Brian Pillman go. But you know what? In reality, if I were put into the same situation, under the same circumstances and conditions, I would have made the same decision today. I don't regret it.
How difficult, or if there was any difficulty, was it to work with a talent that the lines between reality and character is kind of blurred?
Yeah, that's a good question because there are extremes. On one end, the healthy end of that extreme, the professional and profitable end of that extreme, are characters who are extensions of their characters, or their characters are extensions of their real personalities. So that line is almost always, murky at best, and sometimes it's hard to find it. And I enjoyed that. I enjoy working with characters who have strong characters, a great sense of who they are, and push the envelope. And sometimes, when talent wants to push the envelope, they're creative people by nature, they're performers by nature, and they're constantly striving to perfect and in some ways develop new aspects of their character. And sometimes what they see in their head, what talent sometimes see in their head as a good idea, may not make sense from a business perspective. So it could be difficult. And on the other end of that extreme, you got people who actually believe they are their characters. That becomes a real issue because the connection to reality becomes a problem. And we've seen far too many people who, while they're in the business, can't separate themselves from their character. And that can become an issue. And we've seen a lot of people who, long after they get out of the wrestling industry, still have a difficult time separating who they really are from the character that they perceive the audience wants to see. And that can sometimes be sad. But yeah, it's a challenge, but it's, I think that's true, Super Dave, in all forms of entertainment, right? Directors for movies and television have to deal with that issue. I'm sure if you're in a rock band, for any length of time, you've got chemistry issues and personality issues and conflicts. And I just think creative people by nature are constantly pushing the envelope if they're successful. And the harder you push and the farther that envelope expands, so you have to push even further, it does create conflict. But I think it just goes with performers of all kinds.
Is it difficult to find that balance of you love the character they're portraying on television and you're pushing them and you're encouraging them, but then behind the scenes, is it difficult to on one hand you're patting them on the back and on the other you're like, okay, wait, the cameras are off, I'm talking to you about business, or I'm talking to you about direction, let's focus here?
Yeah, it could be in some situations. I never really had that issue. I mean, I didn't. Again, because I've always enjoyed people who were really invested in their characters. But I've never really had a situation backstage where I had to verbally shake somebody out of their dream and wake them up to the fact that we're not really on TV right now. This is, two people talking. This is business. This isn't performance. It happened, but it was never really an issue for me.
All right, let's go to number 4, Sean Waltman.
That's an interesting one, right? Because I always liked Sean Waltman. I from the first few times that I saw him in the ring, 1, 2, 3 Kid and WWF. And, he's from Minneapolis. Sean was from North Minneapolis. He actually he lived like 4 blocks from me for a while when we were both living over in North Minneapolis. And I always liked him. I respected what he did. He was able to deliver. That was at a time when you didn't see a lot of guys who were not 225 pounds and up. It was before the cruiserweight division. So Sean immediately brought an athleticism and a presentation to the ring that very few other people at that time were doing. He could fly, he could bounce, he sold, he was an amazing, amazing performer when it came to selling. So I always enjoyed him, and certainly when he came to WWE as Six, or whatever we called him at the time, Six Pac, was a spinoff 1, 2, 3 Kid. Get it? Pretty smart, right? I can add.
Brilliant.
But I was really happy that he showed up in WWE, that he came to WWE, and I had the chance to bring him in. But the chemistry between him and Scott and Kevin was so good. I mean, Sean Waltman really brought a layer of, I don't know, I hate to keep using the same word too much, but authenticity and vibe. Just brought a vibe to the nWo that just enhanced the kind of cool factor that the nWo was embracing at that point in time. And I like Sean. I always got along with Sean. We never really had any problems backstage, at least that I can remember. Nothing significant. Communication was always pretty easy with Sean. For the most part, he really conducted himself as a pro. Of course, there's a time he pulled Flair's trunks down on purpose and showed his ass. Not that hadn't happened before, but actually I was under a fair amount of pressure from Turner Broadcasting at the time to kind of tone down some of those elements of what happened in the ring, because it was causing an issue with ad sales, and the advertisers were noticing it and speaking out. But getting rid of Sean, that was an issue, and it really wasn't an issue between Sean and I, because Sean and I had worked out an agreement. In fact, we had negotiated Sean's agreement. I think it was a renewal at that point in time, or an extension. And we had negotiated money, time, number of days in the contract, all the standard details had been negotiated over the course of a couple months. Really, it took some time. By the time you start negotiating with talent and agents, and then the attorneys get involved, and then they write contracts and they get drafted and redrafted and redrafted and redrafted. Attorneys love doing that shit, man. They just, because they get paid by the hour, most of them. But by the time we got it all done, we finally had the contract done, and I had signed it. We thought we had a done deal, and we, meaning WCW, myself particularly, sent it off and didn't hear anything back for a period of time. Could have been a week or 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever. And that didn't really bother me too much because, again, we were slow getting the contract to Sean, so it was, at least half of our fault. But all of a sudden, it started going beyond a week, week and a half, 2 weeks, and finally put some pressure on Sean's agent at the time. And lo and behold, they decided, we don't want to agree to what we've already agreed to. We want to reopen negotiations. And that was that for me was a red line. When you shake hands with somebody, verbally agree with somebody, come to a meeting of the minds, as they say in contract law, I take this stuff pretty personally. When I give somebody my word, I give them my word. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Good or bad, whether I want to do it or not, after thinking about it, if I commit to it, I'm going to follow through and chalk it up as a learning experience. And when Sean's agent, manager, whatever he was, decided he wanted to take advantage of an opportunity to renegotiate a deal that we'd already been talking about for a long time, it's like, can't do that. And in a way, it was, I don't want to say it was unfair to Sean because he was a participant, but he was relying on his manager, and his manager overplayed his hand, didn't think that I would make a move, and I did. Fired him immediately. And within a week or less, next time I see Sean Waltman, he's in the ring for WWF, cutting a promo on me and a part of DX. And I really do think that DX became a much more viable version of the nWo, because that's all it was, folks. Hey, Dave Meltzer, if you're listening, because I heard some video of you the other day talking about how, Vince McMahon ended up being the ultimate heel owner, authority figure, before I did. And you're wrong. Once again, you're wrong. I created that character, or I evolved as that character is probably more appropriate, a full year before Vince McMahon decided to come out from behind the broadcast desk and take a role as that heel dominant manager or owner. But I think Sean Waltman added so much authenticity and credibility to DX for no other reason, setting aside his abilities in the ring and all. But Sean was a big part of that nWo vibe when it first took off. And to lose that was, I don't want to say it was a mistake, because again, faced with the same situation, particularly when you come to a meeting of the minds, you shake hands, you think you've got a deal, and then some, manager decides he wants to take advantage to renegotiate, that's a fucking no-fly zone for me. That's just an absolute no-fly zone. I would probably do the same thing. In fact, I know I would, even if I saw that doing so would probably come back to put pressure on us creatively, as it obviously did with DX. But yeah, it was, it's fun now. Sean and I are friends. We talk through it. I see his side of the issue. He sees my side of the issue, and we both laugh about it now. Sean turned out just fine. He did just fine with his career, and as did I, ultimately. So it is what it is. But yeah, losing Sean, firing Sean, it was a tough one. It was a tough decision, but again, one that I would probably make today, given the same circumstances.
In certain parts of the wrestling world, people say, oh, I hate Eric Bischoff. Oh, I just hated that guy. I never liked Eric. Eric's got a lot of heat, but he would tell us that heat is life. You know who everybody hates, myself included? Steven Singer. Okay, not really. I do have some exciting news. Remember my friend Steven Singer? Yeah, the I hate Steven Singer guy. Well, as you know, Steven Singer is the most hated jeweler in America by other jewelers. But why is that? Well, it's because my pal Steven Singer has the best guarantees. He's got the best warranties, and all at the perfect price. We're talking 365 days a year. There's no fake and phony sales here. There's no fake discounts. There's no stupid pricing games. No nonsense ever. Just easy, just fun. That's why Steven Singer is a real jeweler that you can trust. Steven Singer Jewelers was just named one of America's leading jewelers. Did you know there's over 18,000 jewelers in America and less than 50 jewelers have received this honor? It's a pretty big damn deal. Just another reason why most other jewelers hate Steven Singer. No one does real diamond jewelry better. Experience the difference at Steven Singer Jewelers online at IHateStevenSinger.com. Always with fast and free shipping. That's IHateStevenSinger.com.
Number 3, Raven.
Raven. That wasn't hard. I didn't enjoy it. Let's be clear about that. I didn't enjoy it. I never enjoyed firing. Well, we'll talk about that. But for the most part, I never really felt good about firing anybody. But with Raven, I was just so tired of his antics. Raven spent a lot of time burying the company and kind of talking to the dirt sheets and doing radio interviews and trying to advance whatever agenda he had by trying to put pressure on me and WCW from the outside. And that's another no-fly zone. It's just not the way to conduct business. And I just get tired of it. And when I offered, at one point, there was a lot of that going on. And it was really unfortunate because in many respects, WCW was at the peak of its success. We're just selling out arenas, selling out, nitros, selling out just about everything we did, generating revenue on top of revenue and exceeding expectations, budgetary expectations set forth by Turner Broadcasting. We're blowing those goals out of the water. And it's funny how you would think that when things are going bad, that's when people would be the most aggressive and dissatisfied, wanting, something different for themselves or something better for themselves. The frustration level across the board when things are bad. You would think that's when people start stirring the shit. But ironically, it was when things were really going well financially. And I guess that's probably where some jealousy and envy and frustration comes in, because if you're someone like Raven was, who was, he was like in the upper third of the, television roster on any given, Nitro. Guys like that want more. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I respect that. You shouldn't ever be complacent in anything that you do. So I never had an issue with somebody wanting more. But with guys like, and Raven wasn't the only one, there were others. But I remember, I think it was in Minneapolis. It might have been here where I'm at right now in Minneapolis. And I just got tired of hearing all the bullshit, in interviews and reading dirt sheet nonsense. So I called everybody together and said, look, if you don't want to be here, I'll let you out of your deal. And it was more of for me, it was more of, okay, I'm going to put people in check. They're either going to stand up and say it to my face, or they're going to know that I know that they're just chicken shits and spreading shit on the dirt sheets trying to advance their agenda. Raven was the only one that raised his hand and said, all right, I'll go. And I respected that. I had more respect for Raven at that point than I had at any point up until that moment, because he was standing up for what he believed in. And it's hard to disrespect people that do that. I have a lot of respect for people that will look you in the eye and tell you how they feel, and given an option, take one that is better for them at that moment. And Raven believed that it was better for him to leave, probably was at that moment, at that time. And he left. I think, and again, Raven's another guy that, we've had on the show previously and in an interview. And again, great relationship with Raven today. We both, have the benefit of experience to look back upon things and kind of no longer react to that situation with emotion, just kind of looking at it for what it was. And I think Raven probably feels good about the decision he made. And frankly, so do I. It was just time.
Number 2, Steve Austin.
That's a fun one. God, it was a fun one. Not fun terminating him. Again, never enjoyed terminating someone. But I was a little motivated. I've told the story before. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. We've all heard it. But Steve had injuries, and that's not why I let him go. I let him go because while he was out with an injury, living in Atlanta, my goal was to keep his character alive. I didn't want people to forget about Steve. So wanted to cut a promo with him, backstage promo with Tony Schiavone, and just to keep his character out there and keep some anticipation for his return. And I asked Tony to reach out to Steve to see, because he wasn't scheduled, to his credit. He wasn't scheduled, but he lived in Atlanta. And I thought, early in the day, so let's get a hold of Steve, have him come in. We're still paying him. Let's have him come in and sit down and we'll do a promo with him. Schiavone went out, made the phone call. And when Schiavone came back, he explained what happened. And evidently, I wasn't on the call. So, could be some murkiness in my recall on this, but I believe what Tony told me is, look, I called him, his wife answered the phone. I explained to his wife that we wanted to bring Steve down to Center Stage, where we were producing WCW Saturday Night Live at the time, and cut a promo with him. And I guess the way I remember the conversation with Tony is Steve's wife at the time said, hey, Steve, they want you to come in and cut a promo. And Tony was able to hear Steve say, tell them sons of bitches to go to hell, or something along those lines. And Tony relayed it back to me. And I thought, that's not going to work for me, brother. And I made the decision to let him go. And I'm really glad I did. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Steve Austin feels exactly the same way I do. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, and really he ever made. Was leaving WCW, because at the time, again, Hogan had just come in. Steve had an idea of something he wanted to do with Hulk, but the time wasn't right. Steve was frustrated, and I'm sure the injuries frustrated him as well. He probably felt like he was losing ground because he wasn't able to work for a bit. But look, if I wouldn't have let Steve go, there would have never been a Stone Cold Steve Austin. It took a while for him to find that character. And I actually did Steve Austin's podcast with him several years ago. I happened to be in LA, and Steve and I had always stayed in touch. And he had reached out and said, hey, I'm doing a podcast. Would you want to come over? He lived in over Marina Del Rey at that time. Not far from my daughter, actually, only blocks away from where my daughter was staying. And I was visiting her. I was there on business. So I went over to do a podcast. We thought it was going to take an hour or two, and we ended up spending about 3 or 3.5 hours. And then as soon as I left Steve's, he called me on my way back to my hotel and said, hey, you want to come back tomorrow and do another one, And I did. And we drank copious amounts of beer, like, whoa, and just had a great time. But in that, if you go back and find it, I'm sure it's in Steve's archives. We talked about, Steve's perspective then, Steve's perspective now, as well as mine. And Steve's words were something to the effect of, hell, Eric, if I were you, I would have fired me too. So it worked out for everybody, right? And for me personally, because keep in mind, when I fired Steve, he wasn't Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was Stunning Steve Austin. When Steve left, he went to ECW, where Paul Heyman, to his credit, let the talent try to find their own characters and do what worked for them. And it was during that period of time, as I recall Steve telling me, that Steve was able to kind of tap into what became the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. And then Steve left ECW and went to WWE as what? The ringmaster. Well, that didn't work, but it did open the door for Steve to kind of recreate or bring that Stone Cold Steve Austin character that he had really developed in ECW and bring it to WWE, and the rest is history. Now, for me, I'm grateful that I fired Steve, because as a result of all of that backstory, and for years, people thought Steve Austin and I hated each other. Like, there was real heat there, and everybody knew the story. He got fired by FedEx and all that kind of crap, because Steve used that to help get his character over in ECW. Steve talked about it all the time. He did, a parody of me wearing a wig and all that. And so Steve used the fact that I fired him to help get his character over in ECW, so that by the time he got to WWE and got through the ringmaster gimmick, became Stone Cold Steve Austin again. I show up in WWE at some point, 2001, whatever it was, and now there's a built-in storyline between me and Steve Austin. The backstory had already been written. The backstory was like, everybody knew about it. You know, wrestling fans were really aware of it because, again, Steve used it to help get his character over. So now I'm in charge of, as a character, in charge of Monday Night Raw. Vince McMahon comes up to me and says, you know, okay, here's what you got to do. You know, you want to keep your job, you got to go sign Steve Austin. And because we had so much backstory that we didn't have to regurgitate, it was all right there in the top of everybody's minds. It made that storyline so effective because it was real. The lines between what was creative and scripted and what was real had been being blurred for so long that it just made that story so easy for the audience to grab a hold of, and it worked. And ultimately, I got to work a lot with Steve, you know, promos in the ring, co-GM stuff. But the cherry on top of it all was walking out at No Way Out in Montreal, wrestling Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, in fairness, it wasn't really a wrestling match. It was more of an ass kicking, but that's what the people wanted. You know, I'm not a wrestler. I never was. I knew what the gimmick was going in. And Steve was still feeling the effects of the injury. So Steve was in no position to take a bad bump from an unskilled wannabe professional wrestler. So I knew what my role was. But going out into that crowd, coming down the ramp in Montreal, sold out crowd, one of the best crowds you're going to find anywhere is Montreal. Just rabid. Toronto, same way. Walking out there because I had so much heat at the time, knowing that when that match finishes, that place is going to explode. And that was the anticipation of me. That's what I was excited about. And it so over-delivered. It was, no question about it, the most fun I've ever had in the ring. You know, it's not the best segment I've ever done or segments. You know, that goes to did I just hear 3 minutes, whatever, or say 3 minutes. That was cool. But wrestling Steve Austin in Montreal was one of, if not the highlights of my career. And none of it would have happened if I wouldn't have fired him. So it's one of the best decisions I've ever made for Steve and for me.
All right, Eric, our number one.
Does anybody know who this is? Y'all are listening. I know we're not taking questions and comments. I really wish we were.
Drop it in the comments. Let's see if you got number one right. Number one is the Honky Tonk Man.
The Honky Tonk Man has left the building, baby. And I was so happy to see it. That's the one exception. I actually enjoyed firing him. And only because he deserved it. He was such an ass and had such an incredibly unrealistic and high opinion of himself at the time. And then, you know, that old school, I'm going to work the young boss, I'm going to take my shot. And he gave me an ultimatum. And that's another thing that I don't respond well. I don't respond well at all to ultimatums. I never have. If anything is going to push a hot button, it's giving me an ultimatum. So since I didn't have a lot of respect for not that I didn't respect the work that he did in WWF, because he did. He had a great career there. And there was a time and a place for a character like the Honky Tonk Man. Unfortunately, time moves on, and Honky Tonk Man still felt like that gimmick was viable, and I knew better. And when he decided to call me out and see if he could give me an ultimatum and have me succumb and give him what he wanted, which was a contract, because he was on a per-night deal. And when he refused to go along with what I wanted him to do, which was to drop the TV title to Johnny B. Bad, it was like, no, I'm not doing that. Cool. I really didn't want to hire him anyway. I was kind of pressured into it in a way, by Jimmy Hart, and ultimately Jimmy, tagged in Hulk to put in a good word for Brutus, or not for Brutus, but for Honky Tonk Man. And Hulk did, not with a lot of enthusiasm or pressure, but he did because Jimmy asked him to. So I brought Honky Tonk in kind of reluctantly, paid him like $1,000 a night or something. And when he gave me that ultimatum, it was like, oh man, if there's ever a time to feel good about making a decision like this, it's right here and now. Thank you, baby. Thank you very much, Honky Tonk Man. I appreciate everything you brought to the table. You don't mean to shit to me anymore, but hey, you go be you. That was fun. I enjoyed it. It's one that I'm proud of.
Did after you released the Honky Tonk Man, did Jimmy ever come up to you and say, hey baby, I'm sorry about it?
No, I think Jimmy was disappointed because I think Jimmy believed that there was money in Honky Tonk Man, and I understand why. He had a lot of success with Honky Tonk, and Jimmy, like a lot of us, a lot of top talent, then and to this day, go back to things that worked in the past and formulas that worked in the past. I think Jimmy really believed that there was money in Honky Tonk. It's just that at that point, we were evolving away from the kind of cartoonish, silly characters and into more of reality-based characters. Not that they all were. I wasn't going in that direction with everybody. There were still some very animated characters that were part of the roster, as there should have been, as should be to this day. Ivar in WWE is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's a very cartoonish animated character, the Ivar character. Now, he has since come out with something new recently, a little bit more of a reality-based character, but there's always a place and time for certain types of characters. You don't want them all to be the same. But I think Jimmy believed that there was money in it. It's just that we were evolving away from it, and Honky Tonk Man wasn't one of those animated characters that I was interested in keeping. I just didn't see the value in them, and I think I was 100% correct.
All right, guys, need to talk about our friends over at SIGNOS. You've heard Eric brag about this product for several weeks now. He's absolutely in love with it, and it's easy to see why. Eric has become a junkie about understanding what's going on better with his body, and he says the real life hack, the thing he's learned the most from, is SIGNOS. And I'm talking to you if you're trying to learn how to lose weight more efficiently and sustainably, but you don't want to have to resort to some stupid, crazy trend. Maybe you want to better understand your body's reaction to food or stress or sleep and even movement. Well, here's some stats to keep in mind. 73.6% of adults here in the United States are classified as overweight or obese. And global diabetes diagnoses are projected to reach over 1.3 billion by 2050. And I think maybe some of that is just an education problem. Let me explain, because I'm just learning some of this stuff too. When you eat carbs, your blood sugar rises, and then your body releases insulin to shuttle that sugar into your cells for energy. But buddy, when you're insulin resistant, now the sugar doesn't get used properly. It lingers in your bloodstream. And that's when weight gain, fatigue, and long-term health risks start to build. Maintaining a healthy weight and a blood sugar that's in range can reverse this cycle. And that's where SIGNOS comes in. This is what we would call a CGM, or a continuous glucose monitor. And what's great about SIGNOS is they package that with an AI-powered platform. And that's going to allow you to see exactly what's going on with all of your food choices in real time. You know exactly when you need a little more activity, or what foods are giving you a spike. And this is a learning process for everybody. In fact, we all make like 227 different food decisions a day, but they're a lot easier if you're getting real-time personalized data just for you. You're going to learn what foods will cause your blood sugar to spike. You'll get in-the-moment alerts when your glucose is on the rise. You'll even get personalized suggestions like, hey, maybe it's time to take a quick walk. You'll understand the difference between physical hunger and stress eating. I'm a big believer in SIGNOS, and you will too. I think we've talked about this before. My wife's in the medical research field, and when we got SIGNOS at the house, she lost her mind. She couldn't believe that this technology was now available for consumers. Years ago, man, this was a totally different process. It's the real deal. Eric believes in it. Megan believes in it. You will too. I can't wait for you to try it. SIGNOS has taken the guesswork out of managing our weight and giving us personalized insight into how our bodies work. With this AI-powered app and the personalized insights that go along with this biosensor, SIGNOS is going to help us all build healthier habits and stick with them. And right now, SIGNOS has an exclusive offer for our listeners. Go right now to signos.com. That's SIGNOS.com and get $10 off select plans with the code 83weeks. That's signos.com with the code 83weeks for $10 off select plans today.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's time to count down the top 5.
Welcome to 83weeks.com. This is Derek Sabato. I'm here with Eric Bischoff, the king of the 83 weeks and the 83 meets. And we're here today talking about our top 5 series that we've had going on here at 83 weeks. And a big topic of the conversation and discussion, Eric, right now is Vince McMahon. And we got a big series coming up on 83weeks.com talking about the Vince McMahon series coming up on Netflix. Coming to you Wednesday at 6 Eastern. Eric, 5 of the top things you've done to mess with Vince McMahon.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of things that we tried. Before we get into it, though, it's fascinating over the last couple of days to see Vince come out and respond through I think it was through his public relations agency, and kind of give us his take on this series before we even see it. I think everybody's tuning in. I don't think there's any new stories about Vince McMahon. I doubt that we're going to learn anything new. We may hear more detail and hear from people that we don't typically hear from. Perhaps, I don't know for sure, but found it pretty interesting. It was a weird move with the federal government looking in, the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, looking into Vince. For Vince, because this is like the first time he's ever sold. That was always the thing. I kept hearing, long before Nitro, whether it's Randy Savage or Hulk or anybody that had worked for a long time with Vince, one of the things they would always say is the guy never sells. And I thought, well, we'll see about that. I'll see if I can make him sell. So part of the things that I did with Nitro is obviously, I believe firmly and proved to be true, controversy creates cash. So some of the things that we did tactically were to get attention, to create controversy, to at least get people to sample the product. That was the goal initially. And then hopefully deliver a product that they would stick around for. And I think we achieved that. But some of the things I did was really, at the risk of sounding smarmy, not just to screw with him, like to entertain myself, but I really wanted to try to get into his head. Sorry, my dog came in. I wanted to get Vince, I wanted to make him sell, but I wanted to get into his head because I thought if I could kind of disrupt his thinking or his patterns or the way he normally did things with the show, that perhaps it would give us a little bit of an edge. And I think, it worked for a long time until it didn't, when Vince got tired of being screwed with and decided to launch the Attitude Era in response to some of the things that we were doing. And it's one of the reasons why I say all the time, I take a lot of credit for the Attitude Era. I wasn't there, but I was largely responsible for it because all the Attitude Era was really WWE, whether it was Vince Russo while he was there or anybody else, including Vince, looking at our formula, looking at the way we presented our product, realizing that we had kicked their ass for almost 2 straight years, forcing them to abandon the way they normally did business because we did get into his head and into his pocketbook. And Vince's response to all of it was the Attitude Era. So give me a big round of applause, everybody, for creating the Attitude Era. But let's get to it, Derek. Tell me what you think about this. I think this is one
of the fun parts of having this conversation. And full disclosure, we're taping this right now. It is September 24th at 7:39 Eastern. And Vince McMahon tweeted out a statement yesterday at 4:53 Eastern. By this taping, he's already fired his PR people. So that is very interesting 24-hour difference in reaction from the statement yesterday depicting that he is not a believer in this Netflix documentary and the finished product to today letting go or separating himself, I should say, from the PR firm that seems to have put that together. So quite the interesting 24-hour change. And I'm sure there's going to be more within the next 24 hours and coming from the documentary that drops on Netflix. But when you declared war on Vince McMahon, that's got to be in your top 5, does it not?
I think that's number 5. I mean, that was really the shot over the bow that started the war. In all honesty, I don't think Vince took, nor should he have taken WCW very seriously as competition, because we weren't. We were in the same much. It's a lot like I say all the time about Tony Khan and AEW. Every time Tony Khan tries to present himself as the challenger brand, or somehow put himself and AEW in the same category as WWE. Clearly, it's professional wrestling. They're in the same business, but they're not competitive. They're not even close to being competitive. And neither was WCW until 1995, when we launched Nitro and went head-to-head. Even going head-to-head, when that announcement was made, I don't know this for a fact, but I doubt anybody in WWE took that threat seriously. Why would they? WCW at that point had never done anything to demonstrate that they had the ability, creatively or otherwise, to do the things that were necessary to become a legitimate competitor. I think that changed pretty quickly, because not only did we go head to head, it was a time slot that WWE owned. They were the incumbent. Nobody thought, and it's interesting because a lot of the dirt sheets all predicted, and I understand why, for the same reasons that Vince McMahon shouldn't have taken WCW or Eric Bischoff seriously, neither did anybody else. And everybody predicted that this would be a horrible disaster, Nitro. So I take a particular, still do to this day, puts a smile on my face when I think back of the Dave Meltzers and the Wade Kellers and so many others who were just like, oh my God, you believe WCW trying to go head to head with WWE? That worked out okay. But yeah, I think number 5 was just making the decision to go head to head. And in fairness, in honesty, I should say, that wasn't my decision. That was Ted Turner's decision.
Right.
I just had the benefit of doing it.
It's funny you talk about one of the major parts of, the wrestling industry at the time, and Vince McMahon not thinking anything that you'd be competitive. Paul Heyman was even on record at that time as well, talking to his good friend Wade Keller, that Bischoff's going to get destroyed. This is a disaster waiting to happen. But at the same time, trying to build his brand. Wouldn't this been something that he would, looking back, be thankful for 2 hours prime time, regardless if it was against the WWF or not WWF, and that you had the balls to step out there and say, I'm handed 2 hours. I'm going to go against them in the longest running time slot professional wrestling on cable television from the 80s back to primetime wrestling to 1995 at that point. It was insurmountable, but at the same time, you guys really did have 2 different markets you were going to, and you brought that market with you with the launch of Nitro.
Yeah, we did. And a lot of people don't realize, again, I'm going to make references to AEW, not because I'm taking any shots, but to put everything into context. Even before Nitro, and a lot of people just don't realize this, if you just look at the ratings for Monday night in prime time and the ratings for WCW Saturday night, which was Saturday night, 6:05 Eastern, 3:05 Pacific.
Right.
That is not exactly a great time spot, right?
No.
Holy crap. Could there be any worse? But even with the disparity in the difference between time slots, prime time versus Saturday night at 6:05 Eastern, we were competitive. They were doing 2.5, 2.8s, 3s. We were doing the same. Some weeks we'd even beat them by hair. But WCW, from a ratings perspective, really was competitive before Nitro. But the real disparity was in live events, licensing, merchandising, pay-per-view buys. That's where, when you look at those categories from a revenue perspective, WWE was number 1. WCW, much like AEW is now, was a distant number 2, might as well have been number 22 or 222 for that matter when you compared revenue.
It's crazy to me to think you declare war on the World Wrestling Federation. You're going to go head to head. One of the major things you need at that point in time to fill 2 more hours of content, because you didn't lose any other content pieces, but you added 2 hours to what you're doing. And the goal was to go live. And the goal was to be in arenas. You needed talent. And the way to get talent at that time was to go out and spend money, was it not?
It was the only way. And this will probably lead into the conversation about guaranteed contracts. But again, I'll try to frame this so that I'm not saying the same things I've said in the past, but also making it clear. WWE had a mature business model. They'd been around for 20 some odd years, 25 years before we launched Nitro, whatever it was. They'd been around a long time.
Sure.
The brand was so well established up and down the East Coast in major markets across the United States, obviously. But they had a very sophisticated licensing and merchandising operation. WCW didn't. Because WWE did have a mature and very profitable licensing and merchandising division, Vince was able to share in revenue. So he didn't have to give big guarantees because talent knew that as long as they were working and they were in a good position and Vince was using them, that between the splits, the profit sharing, if you will, for lack of a better term, profit sharing in licensing and merchandising, profit sharing in pay-per-view, profit sharing based on revenue at house shows, there was enough money there that Vince was able to create that kind of incentive-based revenue model, or I should say, it's not really a salary, but compensation model.
Sure.
WCW didn't have that. We couldn't go after any WWE talent and try to be competitive in a negotiation by saying, well, tell you what, Randy Savage, we're not going to give you a guarantee, but we're going to give you 2% of the revenue of any pay-per-view that you're on, or whatever the formula would be. Because if you looked at WCW's revenues on pay-per-view, they just weren't sufficient to share any revenue with. So we were forced, really, because we didn't have a lot of the mature revenue streams that WWE did, we were forced to offer guaranteed contracts if we wanted to be competitive, much like Tony Khan is doing now. And the business has changed a lot since 1995. But Tony's faced with the same situation. He really doesn't have licensing and merchandising to any significant degree. It's pretty much crashed and burned with their video game and whatever merchandise they sell at retail. It's not a big number, I'm sure. Their pay-per-view numbers are big, but I don't think they're big enough to attract talent in lieu of a pretty sizable guarantee, particularly now when WWE is making those large guarantees. So yeah, paying top talent and being able to say, you know, you're going to make $750,000 a year. You're going to work a maximum of 180 dates a year. There is no profit sharing. You're not going to get any pieces of the licensing and the merchandising or the pay-per-views or any of that other stuff, but you are going to get a check every 2 weeks. And that check every 2 weeks was enough for a lot of guys to make that move, especially guys with families and who had been in the business for a long time. Because you know, when you're young, when you're single, when you're in your early 20s, you know, life is great. It's rock and roll. You're on the road. It's fun. Everybody's having a blast. You're making great money. You're not thinking about tomorrow too much or next month or next year. But if you've been around the block for a little while, or you've got a family, you've got a mortgage, that guaranteed contract, even in some cases, if talent was making less money than they were making in WWE with the profit sharing incentive model, they were inclined to take the guaranteed contract because they knew that they could plan their financial life. So it was definitely a big advantage for us.
Do you consider the fallacy of the fact that you were the first to offer guaranteed contracts when we know that's not true whatsoever?
Not true.
Dating back to Jim Crockett Promotions, dating back to Bill Watts, dating back to really anyone not named Vince McMahon in a power position, but it was still a shot across the bow against Vince when you're walking over to Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and going, here's 120 dates for $750,000, and then go back to Vince, and Vince goes, I can't match that.
Well, he could have, but it would have completely upended his compensation model. He had a very sophisticated, very successful compensation model for independent contractors. But our approach would have required that he totally turn that upside down. And I think it's evolved, obviously, since this time. There are some pretty significant guarantees in WWE. You know, Paul White was probably making $400,000 a year when he left WCW, whatever it was. It wasn't that much. Paul wasn't that highly paid when he left. He would have been in position to get a pretty big guarantee for it. But he decided to go to WWE because WWE offered him $1 million a year. That was a big deal. And I don't know if there was anybody else prior to Paul that was getting that big of a guarantee. I was led to believe by others who may know, maybe not, that was the biggest guarantee that Vince had ever offered anybody, especially somebody coming from WCW. So that was like a big turning point for WWE, but we forced it upon him. He didn't do it because out of the goodness of his heart. He did it because we forced him to do it. And that's just another way that we, Nitro, changed the business.
You know, American Freestyle is going to be here before you know it, and Eric's going to be in front of the camera again. And when he is, take a look at those pants. Let me go ahead and give you a spoiler. It's going to be a perfect jean. Eric absolutely loves the perfect jean. It's his go-to for travel. It's his go-to for date night. It's his go-to in front of the camera because they truly are the perfect jean. You got to try it. If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? You know, the perfect jean has really redefined what jeans can be, meaning no more crushed nuts or saggy diaper butts, just pure, soft, stretchy perfection. And by the way, over 30,000 men have given the perfect jean 5 stars because you should never have to sacrifice comfort for style. And we're talking over 400,000 old, young, big, and small men agree the perfect jean is the real deal. I mean, imagine denim so stretchy, it's like yoga ready. It's sharp enough to turn heads, but comfy enough you'll forget you're even wearing them. That is until someone compliments you. I recommend the perfect jean for everybody because they've got 6 fits, a size range of 26 to 50-inch waists, and lengths up to 38, giving you over 5,000 ways to find your perfect match. You see, at the perfect jean, you never have to force yourself to make jeans work with the body you're rocking, whether it's thick or skinny or short or tall, no matter where you fall, the perfect jean has you covered. These are jeans that are made for real bodies, not mannequins. By the way, they've got a lot of other really cool stuff. They've got buttery soft tees. They'll make your arms and your chest pop and hide that beer belly a little bit. They've also got really comfortable shorts that give your thighs the liberty they deserve. They've even got den khakis that are pretty cool. But right now, for a limited time, our listeners can get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectjean.nyc, or just Google the perfect jean and then use our code 83weeks15. That'll get you 15% off. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with the promo code 83weeks15. After you purchase, they're going to ask you where we heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. F your khakis and get the perfect jean.
It's interesting you bring up that point because I think it's a good one. You challenged the business model and brought up salaries that go along with additional revenue. You're running more live events. We're going through all that. But at the same time, to be competitive, you're going to have to spend money. And the instant WCW went away, you watched a mass roster exodus of top stars out of the WWF, coming out of the invasion, coming out of that. You watched a lot of those top guys come in and out of the company and didn't last very long. And Vince was able to reset the market at that point in time as well. He pushed Brock Lesnar to be a bigger star on somebody who's not making the same amount of money as, let's say, a Rock was at the time. Resetting the market took place because WCW ultimately went out of business. You pushed the next echelon of stars into Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero's, Chris Jericho's, Lex Luger, all the way to the outsiders. And at the same time, without that push, is anyone getting the Sting contract? Is anyone getting the Paul White contract? And that had to be a shock to Vince's system that he thought no one's ever going to be able to compare or match what I'm able to provide to you for merchandising and all that, where you had to step up and go, here's what it's going to be, and here's what I'm guaranteeing you to get. That was your play in the market, and it was a fight with Vince in negotiations at that point forward, was it not?
Yeah, it certainly was. It was a fight with the way Vince McMahon and WWE conducted business. You know, it's funny, Derek, today, when you read about business and you listen to interviews with people who were successful, who appear to have kind of come from out of nowhere with the next big idea, the next business. And oftentimes they're described as disruptors. It's like a badge of honor to be a disruptor. If you can look at a business and figure out a way that you can make an entry into that business, but do so differently that you actually force change in the market, and you get that tag of being a disruptor that everybody's so proud of. But really, that's what we were.
Sure.
We disrupted in a major, like seismic way. We disrupted the way the business had been established and run for a long time.
So we're going to call the change in the business for guaranteed contracts number 4. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Now,
You're getting closer to the good stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of the good stuff, what do you got for number 3 in terms of your top 5 fights with Vincent Kennedy McMahon?
I think number 3 is challenging Vince to a fight. That was so much fun. So much fun. And
Now,
I got to tell you, it wasn't an idea that just, that I've been planning on for a long time. It was really a reaction to X-Pac coming out and cutting this promo when I fired him from WCW. Don't need to go into that. We've covered it. But when I let Sean go, and he went immediately to WWE, and I've often given credit to Sean, X-Pac, Sean Waltman. Sean Waltman was probably as responsible for the success of the Attitude Era early on.
Agreed.
And particularly the what was the group, DX. X-Pac made that work, and no disrespect to any of the other talent. They were all amazing talent. They all contributed in enormous ways. But the fact that I had just fired X-Pac and he went to WWE, cut that promo, and then DX showed up, in Norfolk and showed up at CNN Center. That was a good move, by the way. That was an Eric Bischoff move. That's something that I would have done. I loved the idea. I hated that it was me on the receiving end, but I loved the idea. It was a great idea. But my reaction to Sean when he came out and cut that promo on me was, okay, I know who's calling the shots. It's not you, Sean. You're just a toy. You're just a tool, cog in the wheel. The guy who's really behind all this is Vince McMahon. So I got no beef with you, Sean. I'd rather fight your boss. Whatever I said. I don't remember what I said, but that was the point.
Well, you said a lot that day. And when
I can hardly remember it, to be honest with you.
When you challenged him to a fight in his backyard because the Slamboree pay-per-view was coming up in the Worcester Coliseum. Yeah, easy for me to say. Right in Vince's backyard. Now, Bruce Pritchard has gone out and say that you had jumped the shark when you did this and that you knew Vincent wasn't going to come. What was your goal at the end of the day if Vince showed up?
Fight him. And look, I love Bruce Pritchard. He's one of my best friends. I don't have a large circle of friends. I'm just not that guy. But Bruce is definitely in that circle for sure. Love him to death. But I didn't know he wasn't going to show up. I'm sure Bruce would like to think that at the time, or even now perhaps, but it's not true. I didn't know for sure whether Vince would show up. In fact, Hulk said, dude, what are you going to do when he shows up? Like there were talents there, Hulk being one, Randy Savage being another, that were really concerned. Like, they pulled me aside. Said, dude, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean what am I doing? I'm challenging Vince to a fight. It'd be great if he shows up at the pay-per-view. That would be awesome. And they pulled me aside and said, dude, you don't know this guy. You have no idea what he's capable of. I said, I've had my ass kicked before, guys. It's not the first time. Won't be the last, probably. And we're going to make a lot of money. So, I mean, this isn't like me trying to be a tough guy, but I've had my ass kicked so many times throughout my life. It's just not that big a deal. And if I can get paid to get my ass kicked,
Sure.
it's not only not a big deal, I'll show up for that most any day. I would have back then. Probably think twice about it now. Don't heal as fast as I used to. But yeah, I thought for sure I didn't know for sure he would show up, but I was told by enough people, Hulk and Randy and others, that did know Vince really well, that they thought he was going to show up all the way up until the time he didn't. When we introed him and he no-showed, they were convinced he was going to show up that day.
I think my favorite part of the whole situation when you challenged Vince was that Jerry McDevitt, the longtime WWF lawyer, sent you a legal letter, stating that Vince wouldn't show up. And not only in that letter he said that by you challenging him and saying that he's not going to show up, it's going to make people think he will show up.
I know, right? That's reverse psychology, Jerry. That's how wrestling works, you dipshit. He's not a dipshit, actually. Jerry, you're a hell of a great attorney. I know you're retired. The whole dipshit thing, that's just me being entertaining. I didn't mean it. It's not disparaging.
Well, you're not being held liable.
I'm trying to hurt your career. This is called cover your ass right now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. I've had my ass sued by Jay. I don't want to tangle with Jerry McDevitt ever again.
No, and I don't think WWE wants to anymore now that he's retired, but that's neither here nor there. But my other favorite part of that, you even had Michael Buffer introduce yourself and Vince at the pay-per-view, and then had the referee count to 10 to make sure that Vince was counted out. So in the only singles match in WCW history for Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff has the victory.
Yeah, I not only beat him for 83 weeks in a row, I beat him in the ring. I mean, that's no wonder I'm in the WWE Hall of Fame. Who else can say that?
Not
Who
many
else
people.
walking the planet today in this universe, living or dead, can say that they not only beat Vince McMahon in head-to-head competition on television, they beat him in the ring. There you go.
Not many people, and that's why you are the leader of the 83-week army. That's for absolute sure.
And honestly, Derek, as I said earlier, there were some of these tactics, and these are tactics. They weren't strategies. They were tactics. They're just one-off kind of maneuvers or moves designed to create controversy or get in Vince's head, and challenging him to a fight was really me trying to get into his head. Because again, I didn't know Vince. I met him once briefly in 1991 for a minute. But all I knew was his reputation. And I was led to believe that he was a hothead. I was led to believe that he'd rather fight than do almost anything else. I almost said something that I shouldn't have said, but I didn't. I knew that he liked to fight, and his preference was to fight as hard and as dirty as he could, which is why I thought there was a chance he would show up. So much so that I told Big Show, day of the event, it's the truth. If you ever talk to Big Show, you can ask him. I pulled Big Show aside because I knew, like Hulk and Randy, those guys weren't going to get, look, those guys knew that at some point they may have to go back to work for WWF.
Sure.
They weren't really that excited about getting that crossways with Vince McMahon, which is another reason they were really not comfortable with me doing what I did, because I was taking this competition between the two companies to an entirely different level and challenging Vince's manhood, essentially. And I knew that, if things went bad for me, I was pretty confident myself. I mean, I wrestled in high school, I wrestled in college, Greco-Roman and freestyle, AAU freestyle wrestling, Greco wrestling. I was in martial arts for a long time. I competed, took a couple pro fights. I've been a bouncer in a bar in downtown Chicago for a while. So, contact wasn't something alien to me, but I was also told by people that knew Vince that he's, if he shows up and comes at you, he's going to try to hurt you. And again, I was confident enough in myself, but you never know. There's always somebody tougher. And I pulled Big Show aside and said, Paul, here's the deal. Do not get involved. If it goes bad for me, do not get involved unless it looks like the damage may be permanent. So if in your judgment, it looks like I'm on my way to a hospital for reconstructive surgery or to replace an eye or anything else, feel free to step in and stop the fight. And I didn't have that conversation with respect to Bruce Pritchard's statement. I didn't have that conversation because I was convinced he wasn't going to show. I made that comment to Paul because I thought there was a chance he might.
Not a bad guy to have in your corner, just making sure that, you don't end up permanently disfigured by Vince McMahon. And considering the irony of that, not 7 months later, he leaves for $1 million guaranteed contract, the first of any kind in WWF history. The irony is striking. One of the major things that happened in 1995 after the launch of Nitro kind of led to something even bigger going on in 1997. But what is number 2 on your list for one of your biggest fights with Vince McMahon?
This was another me just wanting to screw with Vince and get inside his head, get him off of his game. Medusa called me, and I had known Medusa. I started in the wrestling business right about the same time as Medusa. We both started in '87, I believe. I'm not sure if she was there a week or two before me or vice versa, but we both worked for Vern, and that's when. And I'd gotten to know Medusa pretty well. We'd become friends. We did a couple house shows together and did a number of different things together. And she was always been a really cool chick. She was working for Vince, and whatever the circumstance was there, Vince let her know that, the clock was ticking and she didn't really have much of a future there, whatever the conversation was. And I'll never forget, I was at a Nitro, and I believe Medusa called Janie Engel, my assistant, and then Janie handed me the phone, and I talked to Medusa, and she said, "Look, they're cutting me loose. Is there any room for me in WCW?" And because we were friends, and I respected her work, not just because we were friends, but I did respect her work as well. I said, "Sure, we can make something work." And she goes, "Oh, and by the way, I still have the title belt. Do you want me to bring it with?" It was her idea. To this day, now I don't know. I haven't heard her told a story. She tells different stories about and we all do, right? Because memories, whatever. You always try to make the story a little more interesting. I'm not saying this because I hold anything against her, but I've heard her tell the story a couple different ways over the years, and it always ends up with me being the one trying to convince her to do something against her will. That was not the case.
Got it.
But when she offered it up, I snatched it.
Sure.
She didn't even finish the question when she said, "Well, I still have the belt. Do you want?" "Yes, bring that belt with you. Yes." We'll have some fun with that.
So I think one of the major end goals of this domino butterfly effect, as I like to call it, is without Medusa taking the trash can out on Nitro, cutting the promo, dropping it into the trash can, the WWF Women's title, does the Montreal screw job with Bret Hart in 1997 happen without that moment on Nitro?
Derek, I had never considered that. That is a really cool and probably pretty accurate perception. You're right. You're right.
To me, it's just obvious.
Yeah, I think it is. But what's ironic is that when Medusa called me and said, "Hey, I still have, the title," there were no lawsuits going on. Right? We hadn't been sued for the Razor Ramon Diesel nonsense, which we never should have settled that. I'll never forgive the lawyers in WCW for settling that. We should have won that easily. It should have been dismissed anyway. But by the time 97 rolled around, I had so much pressure on me to not do anything that could be considered anti-competitive with WWE.
Sure.
Couldn't reference people there. If I did, I had to be very careful how I did it. I had to be really, really careful. And the truth is, I told Bret, when Bret was, he wasn't sure what to do. He knew, Vince wanted him to drop the belt. Bret was concerned how I would react to that. And because Bret didn't know me that well at the time. And I remember I was here in Wyoming. I was actually elk hunting, and I was having dinner about 30 miles up the road from where I am at a little restaurant halfway to Yellowstone. And we stopped in for dinner, and I got a page, and I called Brett back, and he was in this dilemma, man. What should I do? What should I do? I said, just do the job. Do what you need to do to walk out of there as a professional, and don't do anything you're not proud of. Just, I don't need the belt. You're Bret freaking Hart.
Right.
Nobody's going to care that you got beat in Montreal. It's not going to diminish the fans' perception of you. You're Bret Hart. So there was absolutely no way I was going to do anything with that belt. But Vince didn't know that, because I had pretty much established that I was willing to do just about anything. So, yeah, it's ironic, but I think you're absolutely right, man. I don't think Screwjob would have happened if it wouldn't have been for Medusa coming up with the idea to throw the woman's title in the trash. Thanks, Medusa.
Yes, thank you, Medusa. And I'm sure now we all know what number one is, at least in my mind, after everything we've discussed. The biggest launch, the biggest nail in the coffin of we're here, we're going to compete. Your top fight with Vince McMahon has to be
Lex Luger. And what's really cool about it is that move, without question, set the tone for Nitro. You know, when you launch a business or a new product, one of the things that, if you're fortunate enough to have a great marketing team around you and a marketing budget to work with, and you get all these brilliant minds, everybody talks about branding statements. This was a branding statement.
Yes.
Bringing Lex in, surprising everybody, including my buddy, Bruce Pritchard, and everybody else in WWF, who had no idea that Lex's contract was up. Or if they did, they weren't concerned and believed that they were going to re-sign him. It caught them so flat-footed. And that was a cool benefit of that tactic. But the most important result of doing that is I checked a box that I heard over and over and over again in all of the research and all of the focus groups that we did all over the United States leading up to Nitro. The one common denominator in all of the feedback from those focus groups is we like surprises.
Right.
We like wrestling because watching wrestling, we often get things we didn't expect. And I heard that over and over, and it was the only consistent takeaway. There were maybe a few others, but they were that significant. That was was always top on the list. So I thought, wait a minute. I've got an opportunity to do two things. One, creatively pretty cool surprise for the show, satisfy that audience, establish to the audience who were watching Nitro, because it was the premiere episode. Nobody had ever seen it before. We didn't have any reputation other than one that, WCW brought to the dance because of everything else we'd done up until that point. But that was a hell of a branding statement. Nitro was the place to come if you want to see the unexpected, if you want those big surprises. And we continued, along with other things, to try to create those surprises on Nitro, because that became kind of our branding statement. That's what we became known for.
I think one of the really cool underrated moments of Lex coming to WCW is that you had something in Lex that came from WCW to the WWF, was pushed really hard up in '93, was never given that over-the-top push, and then was on his way down in the company. He was all nice way to say a mid-carder at that point in time, and you put him in the ring with Hulk Hogan. You put him in the ring with Sting, Ric Flair. It's not just that you took a guy from their roster that was on TV over the weekend on syndication. You put him in a top spot, and you did it as someone who didn't have the best relationship with Lex either. I'm going to put the creative juices behind this guy who I have issues with and trust issues with, and I'm still going to present him as a bigger star than the WWF ever achieved. And I think that goes right to the core of Vince McMahon, because he's a creative guy at the end of the day.
Yeah, and one of the things that always pissed me off, and when I say pissed me off, it was more of a challenge than anything. I didn't get pissed off when people say, yeah, but Vince really knows how to create talent. Because I knew it was true. That's why it pissed me off. I knew it was true. And WCW really hadn't. It's not what we were known for. And prior to me, being in charge or otherwise, even after I was, and I always, I don't want to say resented, but it was like a goal of mine. And with Lex, although I didn't create Lex, obviously, he'd been around quite a bit in WCW before I even got there, and certainly in WWE, there's the Lex Express and all that. But I made Lex a bigger star than Vince McMahon did. Just like I made Scott Hall and Kevin Nash bigger stars than Vince McMahon did. When you see Kevin Nash at a convention, he's not wearing Diesel gear. He's not trying to push Diesel merchandise. People, wrestling fans, they know of Kevin Nash as Diesel, but his star had never been brighter than it was when he was part of the nWo. And I'm proud of that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that was Lex, no doubt, was the first really major. That wasn't a shot over the bow. That was a kick in the balls. I love it.
There's your headline coming out of this video. Eric Bischoff kicked Vince McMahon in the balls with Lex Luger debuting on Nitro. Eric, I don't think we missed anything. Any other things that might have fallen on your list? Maybe some honorable mentions?
Well, there was this one time that Zane Bresloff and I were in Las Vegas. There was the NAPTY TV convention. I've talked about this before. But This is kind of a fun thing. This is, again, trying to get inside of his head. Now, Zane wasn't a drinker, and I was. And we were in Vegas for a couple of days early. It was the National Advertising Production Television, whatever it was, NAPTY. It was all the major television producers and studios, because syndication used to be a really big part of the television industry. It's not so much anymore. But at one point in time, it was a major part of the television industry. And they would have their conventions, been to conventions, and I think they alternated, like New Orleans, Vegas, Miami, whatever. They were really big freaking deals. I went to one in Miami and the Eagles were playing. One of the television production companies that was there, I can't remember which one it was. It was a big one, but they hired the Eagles to play for a corporate party that night. So it was a really big deal. But one year it was in Las Vegas, and Zane Bresloff, and I was very close with Zane. He was a friend of my family, my wife. We got along great. I go, and Zane knew everybody. He was so wired in Las Vegas because he loved to gamble. He didn't drink, but he loved to gamble. Sportsbook. And I was sitting there talking to Zane one day or one night, and he goes, because Zane had a lot of friends in WWE.
Right.
I would get a lot of information from Zane, from WWE and his contacts. We were sitting down, and I probably had a beer or two in me at that point. And he goes, hey, Vince is staying over at Treasure Island. He's got reservations there. I said, really? And Zane said, I've got some people I know there. If you want, I can cancel his reservation. Now, the reason that that's meaningful is because it was really hard to get a hotel room during that convention in Las Vegas. People were booking that event, booking their hotel rooms months and months and months in advance. So I thought, God, would that be cool? Vince goes to check in and his room is canceled. He doesn't have anywhere to stay. Just another way to get inside his head and piss him off. Yeah, that's an honorable mention. Not too many people know about it unless you listen to the show. I've discussed it before, but that was kind of a fun one.
I can just imagine Vince McMahon yelling "goddamn pal" at a hotel.
What do you mean I don't have a reservation? I'm Vincent K. McMahon.
It would be Bruce's fault at the end of the day. Like, no doubt in my mind, he would put that one on Bruce. Like, I can see the conversation happening, and I can see just Bruce getting red-faced, and that would have been tremendous.
But that was Zane Bresloff's idea. I just encouraged it.
All right, I got to tell you, I was late on the Cash App train. I was using an old school app, and then when I started to do more in-person business, I realized, hey, I'm missing out. And now everywhere I go, I mean, every major convention, WrestleCon, StarCast, WrestleCade, wherever they are, Everybody's taking Cash App. Cash App is more than just a safe way to send and receive money, by the way. Did you know with the Cash App card, you get tons of extra perks without any hidden fees? Yeah, think early access to concert pre-sales, and I'm talking big stars like Sabrina Carpenter or even Kendrick Lamar. Plus, you get discounts on everyday purchases at brands that you're already spending money on. So why not get a discount? It also keeps your money safe by automatically flagging suspicious transactions and letting you lock your card instantly if it's ever lost or stolen. For a limited time, new Cash App customers can earn $10 if they use code CashApp10 in their profile at sign up and send $5 to a friend within 14 days. Terms apply. Cash App is a financial services platform, not a bank. Banking services provided by Cash App's bank partners. Prepaid debit cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Discounts provided by Cash App, a Block Inc. brand. Visit cash.app/legal/podcast for full disclosures.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's time to count down the top 5.
We wanted to celebrate Nitro, Eric. I can't believe it's been 30 years by asking you, what were your top 5 WCW Monday Night Nitro moments? And I thought, hey, what better way to celebrate Nitro than to ask you your top 5 moments? And we want to hear from you guys right now live on YouTube. What were some of your top 5 Nitro moments? We'll start with your number 5, Eric, when Diamond Dallas Page disguised himself as La Parka. This was a major surprise. I remember losing my mind as a young fan when I saw this. He's knee deep in his feud with Randy Savage in 1997. La Parka was one of my favorite luchadors. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, did La Parka just hit a diamond cutter? Bang! Here's the big reveal. I loved it as a fan, but why was this one in your top 5 and so special to you, Eric?
Because I think for me, now DDP will have a different perspective because, he lived it and I didn't. But for me as a producer, it was like, it wasn't the peak, certainly, of Page's success, but he was sure on his way. And I think it was the moment, in combination with a lot of other things, but it was the real pivot point for Page to go from stardom to superstardom. And it's the magnitude of how that moment catapulted DDP into the level that he ultimately became. It was an important moment, and it was so well executed. Even in the shot that Super Dave just put up, you look at that crowd. They're behind the finish. They got the diamond cutter up. They're all on their feet. And when you can create that much energy and reaction as a television producer, and I'm certain as a performer, it's a real sweet moment, man. And that was one of my favorites.
What a magical moment it was. I know it's got to be on DDP's short list too. But when we're asking you about your top 5 Monday Nitro moments, and again, we're live on YouTube. We want to hear your top 5 below. The number 4 moment that you picked was the genesis of Crow Sting. So to set the backstory, the nWo has become a thing when Hulk Hogan joins the Outsiders in July. And then we've got the August pay-per-view where the nWo is now in control of the big gold belt and they spray paint the world title. By September, well, that's the month for War Games. It's going to be WCW versus the nWo. And you guys had a quote-unquote fake Sting, Jeff Farmer, dress up in Sting's gear. And we had a cliffhanger on a Nitro that made people wonder, hey, is Sting with the nWo? And, of course, we find out at the pay-per-view, no, it was the nWo trying to pull a fast one and confuse other people in WCW. And it wasn't too long before, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? Who's that? It's Sting, but he's not colorful. He's not neon paint. It's black and white, and he's got a leather jacket, and he's sitting in the rafters. Why is the birth of Crow Sting in your top 5, Eric?
Probably for a lot of the same reasons that the DDP moment as La Parka was, because it was, and I think for me, it even goes a little bit earlier than that. I think Sting was doing an interview. He had his back to the camera, and he just dropped some kind of, he foreshadowed what was to come in a way that had people scratching their heads, right? It's like, wait a minute, what did he just? Why has he got his? He's turning his back to us. The people were confused in a great way, right? That was the goal, is to get people going, what the hell is going on with Sting? And then obviously the Crow Sting character began, and as you just talked about, the real genesis of the character itself, because it was so phenomenal, man. I always like to go back to the beginning of anything. It's one of the reasons I talk about, the spider web of life. I'm here right now, but if you really look at the reason why I'm here, you've got to go back to this, which will take you back to that, which will definitely take you back to this. And I love kind of tracking the timeline of great moments and great ideas, because they all start somewhere. And the Sting character, the Crow character, the genesis of that character really started for me, I think, on September 16th, 1996. And it became such, to this day, something that people still talk about. And Steve Borden, is still traveling the world signing autographs as Crow Sting. So how do you not look at that moment and go, that was pretty important. That was pretty cool.
It is interesting to think too, because, you take a look at a guy like Hulk Hogan, who certainly had two different iconic personas. We know what we're talking about, the red and yellow and then the black and white. Well, Sting kind of had the same thing too. He had the neon colors and then he had the Crow thing. But where we would see Hulk Hogan sort of post wrestling, when he's just making public appearances, he could go back and forth. Some days he'd do the yellow and red, and other days he'd do the black and white. I find it interesting that Sting has not really done that. He has maintained, with the exception of that one-off at StarCast, and then when his son's dressed up to pay homage to the past and his final match in Greensboro last year, he's maintained the Crow persona the entire time. Like, I know we talk about the importance of the nWo to WCW, but the importance of the nWo to the Sting character can't be overstated, because he never went back to neon. He stuck with the Crow look the entire time. It changed his career. He may have been the biggest beneficiary of the nWo. In totality, it may have been Sting.
Man, it's an interesting perspective, and I agree with you on that. If you think about it, again, stepping back, don't get mired in, but if you would have beat Hulk clean and whatever, like, take your armchair quarterback or your armchair booker hat off, just step back and look at it and think about it from a perspective of Sting was originally supposed to be the third man. He didn't get that opportunity, which in some respects was probably a disappointment for Sting, especially given where the nWo eventually landed, and it continues to exist, right? nWo is still one of the top 10 merchandise items in the WWE merchandise catalog to this freaking day. And Sting had the opportunity to be the third man, and he wasn't. But if you look at, as you just pointed out so well, who actually benefited the most as a talent? Arguably Hulk, because it was a second career for him. It was completely reborn as a character and enjoyed a tremendous amount of success as a result. But Sting, I think, in many ways benefited even more than Hulk. I mean, Sting's been able to make a lot of money with that Crow Sting character for the last, what's it been now, 25 years?
Yeah.
30 years? Whatever it's been. It's a big benefit. I think it's pretty cool. And it certainly catapulted Sting. Sting was never as popular as a character in WCW as the Surfer Sting character. He was not a fraction as popular in WCW then in terms of scale, people that were watching and supporting, as he was the Crow Sting character. It was a much bigger character for him.
I just think it's so interesting that, the nostalgia is there for almost every wrestling personality. But where Hogan could reach back in his bag of tricks and come back with the red and yellow or the black and white, Sting has maintained the Crow Sting. You got to think it's because it just resonated with fans in a bigger way. I had a conversation with him not too long ago, and he told me that the nWo angle really connected him with a large portion of wrestling fans who maybe were bullied at school or in youth sports or whatever. They could identify with this one guy against this band of bad guys these rebels, these bullies, because that's what the NWO was. And Sting sort of represented the vigilante who could overcome all of that. So those people who maybe felt they were being picked on or isolated from others or what have you in their real life, maybe that character resonated more. But I definitely feel like it pulled an emotional lever with fans that the Neon Surfer Sting never did.
Yeah, the Neon Surfer Sting was cool. It was exciting. It was colorful. It brought a lot of positive energy. Woo! And all that was fun. You know, it's engaging. The audience could participate in it, right? And that's always really, really freaking important. But I think the psychology, as you laid out so well, the psychology behind the character reached the audience at a different level. You know, the audience theoretically, they're watching because they're living vicariously to one degree or another. They're living vicariously through these larger than life characters that they see on television. Same is true with dramatic series and probably sitcoms at some level. You relate to those characters in some unique way that makes you interested in them, right? Whether you're interested in their sense of humor or their ability to tell a story, their ability to make you feel certain things that you don't feel in the course of your normal day life. The psychology with the Sting character, he was really an anti-hero, right? He was the ultimate good guy that's now willing to pick up a frickin' baseball bat and clear a room because that room deserves to be cleared. That's like an aspirational quality, I think,
Yes.
that most people at least like to believe is deep down within them. Some people probably believe it's right on the surface, and for some people it is. But I think almost everybody wishes they could be that guy that would show up and clear that room of the bullies that deserve to be cleared out. We all want that. We all want to be the hero. Sting was that hero in a relatable way, not in a visually dynamic way.
Isn't it interesting, too, that the two hottest acts that WCW and the WWF had, and we'll call it 97, 98, were really doing the exact same thing. They were allowing the audience to live vicariously. With Sting, you know, you were able to, you know, that character was going to go take care of the bullies, and he was going to stand up for the little guy, and he wasn't going to be picked on, and he was a vigilante. And on the other channel, who didn't want to live vicariously through Stone Cold Steve Austin and flip their boss off and tell him to kiss your ass and give him a star? Everybody wants to beat their boss up. Everybody wants to beat up bullies. Like, I think it's interesting that wrestling fans in 97, if you had some angst, you could live vicariously on Nitro or USA.
And yeah, both characters, certainly Steve Austin was that blue collar everyman. He's got to show up to work and take crap from his boss or coworkers and just said, you know what? Enough of it. I'm not doing this anymore. And that's I've worked a lot of jobs in my life, a lot of construction jobs, physical jobs, landscaping, digging ditches, roofing houses, you know, jobs where it's tough work. And you realize early on that almost every place you work, there's somebody, an immediate supervisor or somewhere up the line that everybody's kind of like, man, I'd like to get that guy get him out behind the bar one night, just let him know how I really feel. That was Stone Cold Steve Austin, but he did it in a fun way. That was visually fun to watch and live vicariously through.
Kung Fu Stick is with us here live, and they say, Eric, who was the person who could have did the Sting gimmick? Not the Sting gimmick, but the Sting gimmick. The idea being, we've talked about this a lot with The Undertaker. If anyone other than Mark Calloway does that, I think we all agree, it doesn't come off quite as well. You know, maybe it would have been a 6 week or a 6 month. I don't know that it would have been a 20+ year career. But if someone else were to do this Crow character, I'm not saying Surfer Sting. If Surfer Sting just stays with Steve Borden, if we need someone else to do this vigilante angle, and he's going to don the Crow face paint and put on the black coat and sit in the rafters, is there anybody else that could have pulled it off, or did it have to be Steve Borden?
I think it had to be Steve Borden because, again, you got to go back and kind of remember at least what the general direction of the nWo and WCW was nWo is going to come in, decimate WCW, and then WCW is going to rise from the ashes and regain their position on the throne by taking out the nWo. That was the premise of the long-term story that we had for that. Obviously, it took a lot of twists and turns all the way in between, but that was the general premise. We knew initially that it had to be somebody that the wrestling fans identified most strongly with as a WCW hero. And you had a choice at that time. Arguably, Ric Flair was that guy in the minds of many. But the younger audience, the audience that we really had to kind of draft up and bring up along with us and expand, that was Sting. You know, your hardcore wrestling fan, your devoted traditional wrestling fan, it was Ric Flair all day long. But the younger wrestling fan, the younger part of our audience, it was definitely Sting. And given the choice between Flair and Sting, I couldn't imagine Ric Flair dressing up like the Crow with a bird on his shoulder, sitting up I certainly couldn't see Ric Flair scaling down on a rope, getting dropped in the middle of the arena. I could see Sting doing it, and it was the right choice. I don't think anybody else could have done that. I mean, physically, could somebody else have done it? Sure. A lot of guys could have done it. Could have been Crow Guerrero, I guess. But here's the reason why I think Sting worked so well. Keep in mind, Sting had been studying acting for a long time. In fact, I executive produced an independent film with Sting called The Real Reason Men Commit Crimes, I think. I was the executive producer of that. I think it aired on TBS or TNT, one or the other. But Sting was really committed to acting. He was learning. He was studying. He was training with acting coaches. And that character, you had to kind of immerse yourself in a character. You didn't have the luxury of the spoken word. There were no interviews to get that character over. There was very little physical contact for a long time in order to get that character over. There were no matches. There were no 2-minute promos, but the character had to grow and build. And I think because Sting understood how to use his body, his presence, his eyes, even though he was in full makeup, he made that character believable. I don't know that any other wrestlers on the roster at that time would have taken the same approach to that character as Steve Borden did because of his passion for acting. And I know people can say, what do you mean acting? You did all you had to do is stand there with a bird. Yeah, try doing that and getting a reaction sometime. It was more than just the outfit and the gimmick and the staging. It was more than that. It was a character that didn't talk, that did very little physically, that connected to that audience in an amazing way. And that's great acting.
We're visiting Eric's top 5 Nitro moments. As a reminder, number 5 was DDP doing his best La Parka in the middle of the Randy Savage angle. Number 4 was the creation of Crow Sting. All right, guys, let's be serious here for a minute. Life happens fast. You know, one minute you're driving home after work and the next you see flashing lights in your rearview mirror. Your heart skips, your hands tighten on the wheel, and you start asking yourself, what do I do now? That's when you need someone on your side. And with the Legal Buddy app, you can connect with a local attorney in seconds, not hours, not days, but right when you need the help. Whether it's a DWI, a car accident, a criminal charge, or even just a traffic ticket, the Legal Buddy app puts real legal support right in your pocket. Imagine having an attorney on call, ready to help guide you through some of life's most stressful moments. And hey, by the way, this isn't a call center. This isn't a waiting game. It's direct access to a lawyer who understands your situation and your community, one who can step in right away. Think about it. When trouble knocks, do you want to face it alone? Or would you rather have the confidence of knowing a professional is already on your side? That's the peace of mind that Legal Buddy gives you. And here's how easy it is. Just go download the Legal Buddy app at legalbuddyapp.com. Register today and be sure to use the referral code LEGAL for your chance to win a $250 Amazon gift card. Life is predictable. Accidents happen, tickets happen, mistakes happen. But when they do, you don't have to go through it alone. The Legal Buddy app, always on your side. Download the app today and enter the referral code LEGAL. But number 3 is one that everybody remembers. This too is 1996. This will be our second 1996. This is from late July, just a couple of weeks after Hulk Hogan has become bad guy at Bash at the Beach. I guess we'll call it the Disney Massacre where we famously saw Rey Mysterio Jr. used as a lawn dart. But this got so real, Eric, that the actual authorities were called. This had to be a good feeling for you.
It was so exciting. And yeah, to have ambulances and cop cars and a fire truck rushing to the set because people that lived in proximity to Disney MGM Studios that was watching Nitro live on television called 911 because of what they saw happening on live television. Man, if that's not the sweet spot. I've talked before about the sweet spot. What's the sweet spot, you say, Eric? The sweet spot is when you get an audience that knows everything you're doing is scripted, but then you're able to create a scenario, a scene, a moment where they go, yeah, I know this stuff is scripted, but that's not supposed to happen. That's real. That's the sweet spot. And we just nailed that sweet spot. It was awesome.
It was unbelievable, the reaction from the fans, and all these years later. I mean, people are still saying and referencing that lawn dart scenario. We got to touch on number 2. I think a lot of people would argue this could be the number 1, but Scott Hall coming through the crowd, May 27th, 1996. I think this is your birthday. How old did you turn that day, Eric, on May 27th, 1996?
96, I would have been 41.
It's unbelievable to me to think about you at 41 years old, driving Scott Hall to the show in your Porsche. You know, you've got the former Razor Ramon. You've got this idea. Little did we know that it would become the biggest angle in the history of professional wrestling, that it would literally catapult WCW from sucking hind teat in this Monday Night War, or just in the promotional war of, I mean, the WWF had been king for so long. And with this one move, the winds of change were here. It's number 2 on your list, and well-deserved. Scott Hall's a big part of the entire success of Nitro, don't you think?
Without question. You know, in that moment, again, it's, you know, the same thing with the DDP thing, you know, with playing La Parka and, you know, kicking off the Randy Savage angle, or, you know, all of the things we've already talked about. It's like, for me personally, it's like, where did it all begin? What was the moment that changed so much? Because those are the moments that I put so much value in, right? They're not necessarily the most fun moments, but they're the most important ones. And I think when Scott Hall came down through the crowd, never been done before, everybody thought, oh my gosh, this must be real because I've never seen it before. Nobody does this. And if they don't normally do this, then therefore it's not supposed to happen, therefore it's real. That was the psychology behind that scene. And to see it play out, not knowing then what we've all learned since about how big nWo would become and how it would impact the industry, really. But to go back and look at that moment now, or to relive that moment in my mind, it's pretty freaking awesome, because that was the beginning of so much. That was the beginning of Stone Cold Steve Austin. That was the beginning of the Attitude Era. That was the beginning of, you know, everything that you saw in WWE roughly a year later started occurring because of that moment when Scott Hall came down through the crowd and let everybody know that he was here to make a statement. It was awesome.
We're live right now at 83weeks.com. Hit that subscribe button, and most importantly, turn on the notifications bell. But let us know below, what's your top 5 moments in Nitro history? Yesterday was the 30-year anniversary. Eric's breaking his down. Number 5 was DDP doing his best La Parka. That was 1997. In September of 1996, the birth of Crow Sting came in at number 4 for Eric. The Disney Massacre, which led to Rey Mysterio doing his best lawn dart impersonation. That was late July 1996. That's number 3 on Eric's list. Number 2 we just heard is the debut of Scott Hall coming down through the crowd. But Eric's number 1 top 5 moment in Nitro history is the Lex Luger debut. Why is this number 1, Eric?
Because it set the tone for Nitro, and Nitro changed. You know, people always say, oh, it's going to change the wrestling business forever. Okay, whatever. Very few things, very few moments, very few ideas, very few decisions actually changed the industry. The rest of it is like participation trophies to make people feel good about themselves or each other. This moment, the launch of Nitro, and because of the impact and the buzz that Lex Luger created, absolutely catapulted Nitro right out of the gate. I talked about it earlier. We came out of the gate competitive. We didn't have to work up to trying to be competitive with WWE. We went from a distant number 2, pretty much where Tony Khan is today, and about the same relative position. We went from that to kicking his ass in less than 12 months. But that initial 12 months, we kick his ass one week, he kick ours the next. We were competitive right out of the chute. And it was because, in many respects, because of that moment that we created, that the wrestling audience told me they wanted. It was born out of research, as we've already described. It wasn't like, oh, I got this great idea. I'm so smart. I'm the most creative wrestling person in the world. No, I just listened to the freaking audience and figured out a way to do it. But that way was Lex Luger. And Lex Luger, because of the situation, again, timing is everything, right? Sometimes it works for you. Sometimes it works against you. Timing was on our side. The audience was telling us what they wanted. It was the key to our success. The situation with Lex Luger was so unbelievably unique in terms of the timing and the opportunity that it created. That moment to me is why it's my number 1 moment, because that moment, in my opinion, changed not only my fortunes, Lex's, everybody in WCW's, but if anybody should be thankful for that moment, it should be any stockholder in WWE, because that's the reason WWE started doing what we were doing, which is targeting that 18 to 49-year-old instead of teens and preteens, going live every week, just like we taught them to do, introducing more reality-based storylines, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Mike Tyson, Mr. McMahon. All of that was a result of that moment with Lex Luger, in my not so humble opinion.
We're live here, and we've got a comment from Yes Have Some, who says, the first episode of Nitro was burned in my brain, and I consider it one of the best television pilots of all time, alongside The Sopranos, Lost, and Breaking Bad. I know you have a whole second act after pro wrestling where you just did television, but to hear that your first episode of Nitro, at least in this fan's opinion, is up there with the pilots for The Sopranos and Lost and Breaking Bad, that's got to make you feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I'm a human being. I like to hear good shit. I get enough of the bad shit, so every once in a while, yeah, I'll take that all day long and be grateful for it. Thank you very much.
Well, we're going to talk about some more good shit, as you said, because I felt like, man, I could not have a more different list than you, because I don't think I could have a top 5 Nitro moments without mentioning what I'm going to squeeze into your honorable mentions list. Goldberg beating Hulk Hogan at the Georgia Dome for the big gold belt, like that felt like the high water mark for me for WCW. Like, I think this is one of those moments where, as a wrestling fan, you remember where you were when it happened. I was at my parents' timeshare at the Landmark in Panama City on Front Beach Road. And Monday Night Raw was a taped Raw where they had DX doing some regrettable cosplay as the Nation of Domination. But you had Goldberg, this unstoppable force that came out of nowhere. We didn't even know his name a year prior. And now he's beating Hulk Hogan in the Georgia Dome in front of what seemed like 100,000 fans. Of course it wasn't, but that's on my list, Eric. And it's got to at least be an honorable mention for you, right?
Oh, of course. And arguably it could be on anybody's number 1. At the list, because it was a huge moment. I think we had like 40,000 people in attendance, and it was huge. And it's like it goes back to the beginning of Nitro. Part of the format, the Nitro format, that changed the wrestling industry legitimately, not as a participation trophy phrase. Arguably, this match and putting it on free TV, which was part of the strength of Nitro. I talked early on with Nitro in the format. We're going to bring matches and angles that you typically wouldn't see on real television. We're going to bring that pay-per-view quality content to weekly television. And a lot of the people, a lot of the dirt sheet writers at the time was like, oh, he's going to kill the business. This is going to be horrible. The pay-per-view business is going to die if they're putting all these big matchups on free TV. All of the geniuses who've convinced themselves and others that they understood the wrestling business because they quote unquote studied it. All of them said that it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. Well, here we are years later, after dominating the WWE with a formula that everybody said was going to fail, to take it to the next step and put arguably, in fact, a lot of people were so critical of it. How could you possibly give this away on free TV? And I reminded everybody, because Ted Turner said we were in a television business, not in the pay-per-view business. That's why. Freaking knuckleheads. It's not hard to figure out. You just do what your boss tells you to do. Keep your job, make some money. It's how the world turns. And that's what this match was. It was absolutely pay-per-view quality in the minds of probably the majority of wrestling fans. Absolutely should have been a pay-per-view. In fact, some people say that's the beginning of the downfall of WCW. Like, what the fuck? But yeah, that was a very cool moment and arguably number one in a lot of people's minds.
I feel like Lex Luger is perhaps criminally underrated when you think about magical moments, because you have as your number one Lex Luger's debut, switching teams. He was in the WWF doing a house show on Sunday night. On Monday night, here he is at the Mall of America challenging Hulk Hogan. But it was when he beat Hulk Hogan on Nitro 100, the first ever 3-hour Nitro from the Palace of Auburn Hills, the same building where years prior he was supposed to win the world title at SummerSlam from Yokozuna. He's unsuccessful. And I think everybody thought for sure, based on the Lex Express, well, he's definitely going to win the world title. It didn't happen for him. But it does a few years later when he does the unthinkable. He beat Hollywood Hulk Hogan. How in the world is this even possible? That is definitely on my honorable mention list. I mean, just the reaction from the crowd alone, I think it's got to be on the list of biggest pops in WCW history. But then even the backstage celebration after, where you see Rey Mysterio, Lex, and others trying to furiously scrub that NWO spray paint off the world title. This has to be on the honorable mentions list, doesn't it?
Oh, it's such a cool moment. And again, because of the way my mind works, I'm always looking to go back to the genesis of things and where it all began. To me, that's the most fascinating. Without question, in terms of a big moment, Goldberg Hogan, obviously, this right there with it for different reasons, but this moment's right there with the Hogan Goldberg matchup and Goldberg beating Hogan.
We're gonna have a little fun with this last one, because this is my list. I got to come up with the honorable mentions for your top 5, and we want to hear, what are your top 5 moments? The honorable mentions so far that I've brought up are Hogan beating Goldberg for the title and Luger beating Hogan for the title, but Hogan's not involved in my last one. It was Ric Flair's return to WCW television in the fall of '98. He comes out and they recreate the Horseman and announce that he's back, and it leads to a fiery confrontation with you on camera. And people who'd been reading the Observer and the Torch and calling the hotlines, they knew that there was a back and forth. It led to the iconic "Fire me, I'm already fired." I mean, just a great moment on WCW television. The reaction from the fans that night in Greenville, I mean, it was a pretty special moment. That makes my list of honorable mentions. Would this be on your list as well?
Nah. I mean, it was a cool moment, and if you're a Ric Flair fan especially, absolutely one of his highlights. I thought it was excellent television, but I don't know if I'd put it in there with your other 2 honorable mentions. It wasn't quite that impactful, but certainly a great moment. I enjoyed it. It was fun for me. I got to go out there and work with Ric Flair. Like, if you can't have fun working with Ric Flair, you're in the wrong business. So for that aspect, I really dug it, but I don't know if it had as much impact on me as maybe it did on others.
Well, it was a fantastic moment as a fan who was keeping up with some of the behind the scenes, because I think as wrestling fans, we all want to suspend our disbelief. We want to be able to point to things and say, well, listen, I know what the show is, but now that was real. That felt real. It felt like,
well, it mostly was real.
yes.
That's the sweet part. And I guess I should be looking at this a little differently in terms of significant moments, because it was another example of the formula that made Nitro successful, which was the reality-based television. When I talk about that and I reference reality-based television, it probably means different things to different people. But for me, it's taking real-life scenarios that people are aware of, modifying them somewhat, playing with them a little bit, getting a little creative with them, and bringing those real-life issues into a scripted environment and doing so and keeping it believable. This was a great example of that. You know, one of the challenges, you know, I mean, anybody that knows Ric Flair knows he wears his emotions on his sleeve.
Yes.
It's not going to be hard to figure out what Ric Flair's thinking at any given minute, right? That can be challenging at times, but can also be a real gift. And in this case, from a television producer's point of view and a talent's point of view, in my case, working with Rick, same reason I used to like to work with Steve Austin, because it came so easy. Because Steve Austin could make you believe it was real. Mick Foley could make you believe it was real when he wanted to. Ric Flair could make you believe it was real. And in this scenario, with this backstory, which was very real, and because Rick did wear his emotions on his sleeve, that intensity, his seemingly portrayed hatred of me, that was not acting. That was Rick wearing his emotions on his sleeves and just letting me have it, but within the structure of a story that had a payoff. That's kind of magical. When you can get it, it's magic. It can go wrong too. It can go real shitty real fast in the right or / wrong situation. But in this case with Rick, it was pretty freaking awesome.
SaveWithConrad.com.
My name is Rajiv. I'm in Sacramento, California. I came to Save with Conrad because I've heard Conrad talk about how he helps people all the time save money and the best route to go for getting some mortgages and finances done. And having heard so many different testimonials in the past, it made the most sense to go this route. We were in the market for a new house and we wanted to know what we could afford. So we spoke with Steve and then Diane to get through the pre-approval process to see what we could afford. And then once we were able to understand that aspect of it, that was when we were able to shop around for a house to get a mortgage through Save with Conrad. Everybody on the team was great. Everybody really explained everything fully to where it was more in like layman's terms to where I could understand it as someone not in the business or having shopped around for houses too many times. So being able to understand every step of the process and talking with everyone on the team about that was really, really helpful. And it made me feel really confident that I was going the right route. I would definitely recommend Save with Conrad to others. I know that sometimes people look at it and they go, oh, they're based in Alabama, what could they help me with? But I'm out here in California and they were able to square everything away and get things done really quickly, as opposed to sometimes even people out here don't move as quickly as the Save with Conrad team. So everything was really well done, really efficient, and I would definitely recommend Save with Conrad to others. My name is Rajiv. I'm in Sacramento, California, and I was able to get into my dream home with SaveWithConrad.com.
Available lesson number 212, non-equal housing lender. SaveWithConrad.com.